Somewhere beneath the streets of a European capital, behind vault doors thicker than bank safes, sit 30 million pages that were never meant to see daylight. These aren't ancient scrolls or medieval manuscripts. They're 20th century documents, stamped, sealed, and buried by governments that feared what truth might do to their carefully constructed stories. What if everything you learned about the last 100 years was incomplete, edited, or simply wrong? The Vatican Secret Archives, renamed the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019, hold documents spanning 12 centuries of global history. But it's the modern section, covering 1922 to 1958, that historians have been fighting to access for generations. These are the Pope Pius XII files, locked away during World War II and the Holocaust, during the rise and fall of fascism, during decisions that shaped the world we live in today. In March 2020, Pope Francis finally opened a portion of these records to scholars. What they found wasn't just church business. It was evidence of back-channel diplomacy, intelligence networks, desperate pleas for help, and silences that still echo through history. The question isn't just what's in the archive. It's why it took 80 years to look. The story begins in 1939, as Europe slides into war. Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli becomes Pope Pius XII in March, just months before Germany invades Poland. He inherits a church with members on both sides of every border, with monasteries in Berlin and parishes in London, with priests who will become resistance fighters and others who will stay silent. By 1942, reports of mass killings reach the Vatican through multiple channels. Diplomats, clergy, and Jewish organizations send desperate telegrams begging for papal intervention. Some of these documents were already known from other archives, but the Vatican copies contain handwritten notes, internal debates, and draft statements that were never released. In December 1942, Pius XII delivers his Christmas address, speaking vaguely of hundreds of thousands suffering because of their nationality or race. Jewish leaders and allied governments beg for a clearer condemnation. The explicit denunciation never comes. The newly opened files show why. Internal memos reveal fears of Nazi retaliation against Catholics in occupied territories, concerns about Soviet atheism spreading if Germany falls, and a belief that quiet diplomacy saves more lives than public statements. Between 1943 and 1945, the Vatican runs covert networks helping Jews hide in convents and monasteries across Italy. Thousands are saved. But the archives also reveal that church officials helped fascist war criminals escape to South America after the war through so-called ratlines. The same institution that sheltered victims also provided false papers and passage to perpetrators. When the war ends, Pius XII faces a new challenge: the Cold War. The archives show the Vatican becoming an intelligence hub, passing information between Western powers and resistance movements behind the Iron Curtain. Church officials act as messengers, couriers, and sometimes spies. The moral lines blur further with each passing year. So why were these documents locked away for so long? Because they complicate every version of the story: Catholic, Jewish, Allied, German, communist. No one comes out looking entirely innocent. For decades, historians argued from incomplete evidence. Critics of Pius XII said he was silent, even complicit. Defenders said he acted quietly to protect Catholics and Jews. But both sides were guessing. The files behind these doors, millions of pages, are the missing pieces. And when the boxes were finally opened, contradictions poured out. Letters pleading for action alongside memos advising caution. Evidence of heroism in one folder, evidence of moral failure in the next. One document shows a bishop begging the Pope to denounce the deportations. Another shows Vatican officials warning that a public statement would make things worse. These weren't simple decisions. They were impossible ones. Researchers found drafts of speeches that never made it to the public. Some were too direct, others too political. The final versions were always softened, rewritten until the message was almost unrecognizable. And then come the Cold War years, files that show the Vatican operating like a geopolitical power, making alliances not based on theology but on survival. Agreements with intelligence agencies, correspondence with national leaders, even secret negotiations with regimes hostile to the Church. In one folder, a papal diplomat warns the U.S. about Soviet expansion. In another, the Vatican negotiates with East German officials to protect Catholics living under communism. The Church is everywhere and nowhere at once, visible on Sundays, invisible in the shadows where decisions are made. But the most emotional files are the letters of those who survived because a priest forged a baptism certificate or a nun opened her convent's doors. Thousands of names, thousands of stories. Not miracles, choices, risky, human, courageous choices. And next to them, sometimes only inches apart in the same archive box, are records of the men who escaped justice with church assistance. Fascist officers, collaborators, war criminals who found sanctuary when their victims found only silence. The deeper historians go, the more complex the story becomes. Nothing in these vaults is black and white. It is all gray, human gray, the kind that no textbook ever captures, and no simplified narrative ever survives. Historians now face a new challenge: how to reconcile acts of undeniable bravery with moments of devastating silence. How to understand an institution that saved thousands yet could not, or would not, speak loudly enough for millions. Every researcher who enters the archive describes the same feeling: the weight of responsibility. These documents don't just rewrite history. They force us to confront what we expect from moral leaders in times of crisis. One letter, written by a Jewish father in 1943, begs the Vatican to intervene before his family is deported. The reply, preserved in the archive, expresses sympathy, but promises nothing. The father's fate is unknown. Other files show Vatican officials negotiating with diplomats, drafting statements filled with cautious, careful language, sentences constructed like minefields. Every word weighed, every phrase debated. And then there are the memos that were never meant for public eyes. Notes in the margins, underlined warnings, sidelined opinions. The paper trail of an institution struggling under the pressure of global catastrophe. The Cold War files reveal another layer: an institution reshaped by fear of communism. The Vatican saw atheistic Soviet power as an existential threat. That fear influenced decisions during and after the war, sometimes overshadowing other moral crises. The archives reveal Vatican envoys passing messages across the Iron Curtain, exchanging classified information in train stations, embassies, and private residences. Priests became intermediaries because they could cross borders politicians could not. The result is a history where victims and perpetrators sometimes appear in the same folder. A convent that saved children in 1944 might also have helped a fugitive officer escape in 1946. The lines blur again and again. Historians describe leaving the archives overwhelmed, carrying the weight of stories that cannot be simplified. Stories that defy headlines and challenge long-held assumptions. And still, not everything is open. Some materials remain restricted. Some pages are missing. Some events have no surviving record at all. The archive gives answers but also creates new questions. The debates that follow are fierce. What should we expect from leaders during one of humanity's darkest eras? Absolute moral clarity? Strategic restraint? Or something in between? Some argue that a louder voice from the Vatican could have saved lives. Others argue that a louder voice would have cost even more. The archive does not settle the debate. It deepens it. What the documents reveal is not a hero or a villain. They reveal a man and an institution caught in a storm of impossible choices, where every action had consequences and every inaction had costs. They show a world where diplomacy, secrecy, and survival intertwined with faith, morality, and fear. A world where silence was sometimes strategy and sometimes failure. And when researchers finish their day, they close the boxes gently, aware that each file inside represents someone's life, someone's loss, someone's choice, someone's unanswered plea. The archive is not just a place. It is a labyrinth of memory, where truths are layered and history is not a straight line but a maze. Some pages are so fragile they crumble at the edges. Just like the stories they contain, delicate, incomplete, but still powerful enough to shift how we understand the past. The people who study these documents are not treasure hunters. They are caretakers of truth. Their job is not to justify or condemn, but to understand. And understanding requires confronting contradictions, embracing complexity, and resisting the urge to simplify what was never simple. In the end, the Vatican Archive does not rewrite history. It reveals it, raw, conflicting, uncomfortable, human. And once those doors open, even a little, they can never truly be closed again.